Right, well now we're going to bring it home and back to the UK for the final part, so do stick with us for the last part of the debate. And I'm going to welcome to the stage with me Dr Pierre Noël, who is Senior Research Associate and Director of Energy Policy Forum at the University of Cambridge, specialising in oil and gas markets and industry, and David Howell, Lord Howell, who's an advisor to the Foreign Secretary on energy security and a former Minister of State at the Foreign Office with responsibility for international energy issues. We'd like to try and draw together a bit of what we've heard tonight before the final round of questions. David, Lord Howell, I mean, from what you've heard tonight, do you see a major shift in the role of gas on the questions about gas?
I think a lot of it is happened already. I mean, the major shift has happened in America. The entire world's gas or energy mix is being altered while we're sitting here. All sorts of countries, particularly either side of Africa, which I'm very, very concerned with, Tanzania, Mozambique, Kenya, and on the other side, Sierra Leone, Ghana, and Nigeria itself, are all seeing fantastically changed prospects now, as it turns out that they have got commercially recoverable shale gas and shale oil, tight oil as well, offshore and onshore, which is going to transform their prospects and their politics as well. So there's a huge change going on now. And the question for the politicians and the policymakers is how this is managed in a sensible way, consistent with what is generally agreed in all parties and in government in this country, that we must move towards the low-carbon green age, that we must do it in a sensible way, that we mustn't let the politics screw up the ambitions and the ideals, and that is the really tricky area. This is almost entirely to do, this debate, with communication with people and carrying democratic political societies in a way that will make the aims of low carbon consistent with economic recovery now and a reasonable carrying of burdens, but not an unreasonable carrying of burdens. So that's where we are now.
Pierre, what questions did the debate throw up for you tonight, or observations about the concerns?
Well, you know, I think there's a bit of a reality check to be done. Currently in Europe, all over Europe, gas is displaced. Gas consumption is going down everywhere in all sectors of the economy. If we want more gas to be consumed, we can. I mean, there's plenty of it on the market. But in Europe, gas is squeezed between renewables that are very heavily subsidized on the one hand, and coal, which is absurdly cheap on the other hand. We have, so, and gas is squeezed between the two. So one way out, which would be sensible in terms of climate change, is to have a carbon price that's a bit more reasonable, which by which I would be a bit higher,
yeah.
Which would at the very least restore the competitiveness of gas against coal. But the way we subsidize renewables actually depresses the carbon price in Europe. So we have a set of completely inconsistent policies that give us the worst of all worlds, which is the high cost of renewables and the high emissions of coal.
Well, you've occasionally expressed some frustration with the green agenda. You put it rather politely, saying all parties, should work towards carrying a reasonable burden. But sometimes you have suggested that this burden may be actually rather unreasonable.
Well, what I'm really saying, and this doesn't sound too paradoxical, is that the green agenda, if pressed incompetently in political terms with the wrong compelling messages imposed on people in the wrong ways, will actually delay the green revolution. And we've just had a perfect example here that people are saying, oh, we must be very careful about gas expansion, and we don't, shale gas in America is fine, but we don't want to see too much encouragement here. What is the net effect of that? The net effect is that American coal is pouring into Europe. We're burning more coal here in this country. Europe's coal as a whole is increasing. The actual Germans are planning new coal-fired stations. And CO2, while falling to America to the 20-year lowest level, and has fallen 14% in the last 2 years, and the per capita emissions has fallen dramatically. So it's not just a recession issue.
Well, I did want to challenge you on that, because you have chosen quite a 2-year horizon in a time of low US growth. Yes. Can I call you on that?
Well, you can call me, but there are 57 million extra people in America in the last 20 years, and yet the carbon CO2 emissions are now 20% down. They are very low now compared to... Anyway, here's the zealotry of over-eager. I'm as green as the next. I want to see a low-carbon, high-efficiency, low energy density economy. But if you press this too far and get the politics wrong, what do? You create more pure poverty, which is what we're happening now with very high gas prices, although we haven't got to this. It would get worse with high if they're maintained. You apparently generate far from less CO2, you generate more. You damage competitiveness of industry. You obviously weaken the growth of jobs and delay the recovery. This seems a very, very expensive advance, a very expensive procedure in order to rush through too fast the Green Revolution. It's a question of pace and communication. That's what it is. It's pace, communication, and politics.
Just comment on that if you'd like to.
And what was the question again?
The question is, I suppose, one, do you see it the same way that David sees it, or indeed, if you want to outline something of your own set of solutions, please do that.
I think there's what's happening in the UK is very interesting, because you have a situation that's politically very difficult for the government. It would be as difficult if it was the Labour Party running the country. It's not a question of parties, it's a question of the country has committed to some targets that, guess what, are very expensive to reach. And politicians have spent the better part of the past decade telling people, don't worry, it's going to be very cheap. We're going to go green and we're going to save money at the same time. It's going to be great. And now the invoices are starting to come. And it's only the very beginning. We've barely scratched the surface. So I have basically 2 messages. The first one is, whatever we do on climate change, we have to do it cost effectively. We have to start with the cheapest carbon emission reductions that we can get. Currently, we're starting with the most expensive ones. Offshore winds is a typical example. Solar panels is another typical. I mean, the cost of them is falling quite quickly, we have to be honest, but still very, very high. That's the first message. Do it cost effectively. The only way that I know about to do that is simply to tax carbon, right? At the highest level that the political process will allow, which may not be very, very high, but hopefully will be higher than what we currently have. The second message is, let's be very honest about the long-term objectives. If we don't have a meaningful global agreement that will map a way to share the burden of addressing this global problem, there will not be any low-carbon system in any country. There will be a lower carbon system.
That's proved elusive.
Compared to what we have.
Well, because we won't get a global, agreed, legally binding system. We've tried that. The Chinese are not going to touch that. The Russians are not going to touch it. The Americans are not going to touch it.
The problem is we trade with all those people.
That is the fantasy world. But we will get lower carbon on a substantial scale. America is enjoying it now because, at least partly, of the shale gas revolution, the switch from coal to gas, which is massive. China is actually, although their emissions are very, very high and they're the great emitter, they are applying all kinds of new energy technologies. They're brilliant at solar, reducing the cost of solar, so that it may come within reach.
Right.
So this is really, the talk about global targets, you see, is the wrong approach, I'm afraid. I think the right approach is technology. We have to apply the technologies to get the cost of CCS down, to get the solar way, way down. It can be reduced by 9/10 over the next few years. If we really concentrate on technology and government support for the technology, for green technologies, we will make progress. If we go on about targets And taxes, we won't. We'll just get political reaction and we'll go backwards, as we are doing now.
Let's get a reaction from Pierre.
I entirely agree that spending money on R&D is key to any serious energy and climate policy. R&D spending on energy has gone down 80% in 30 years. So, this just gives you a bit of a reality check.
That's where the money should go.
China and green energy.
Wind farms.
China and green energy is my favorite one. I've got a spreadsheet in my computer where I track year after year the percentage of the growth in Chinese energy, primary energy consumption, that's covered by coal. And it used to be 98%, and now it's 78%. And it's going down very slowly. So, yes, I mean, they manufacture solar panels that they send to Germany because the German consumers is apparently very willing to pay to transfer subsidies to China. This will stop before we start doing it in the UK.
But you see, this brings us back to shale gas. Mr. Liu Turnin, the Chinese energy minister, told me the other day in Brussels that China had a 5-year plan for shale gas, that they had more shale gas than America, if they could get to it. He admitted the geological problems, which some other Chinaman said that is Chinese for saying some of these shale gas deposits are under cities, a little awkward. But they have got, if they move that way to shale gas, they will achieve more in terms of reducing the growth of carbon emissions than anything else, than all these other fancy global tools.
Reducing the growth.
I mean, whose side are we on?
Reducing the growth, yes.
I'm on the side of
that is not going that is not going to give you 450 ppm.
We are moving towards the end now, so I would love to bring anyone in who just feels that they've got to ask. If you could make the short, pointed questions, would be very appreciated. The gentleman in the blue shirt, and then, oh gosh, so many hands. The lady in the black top, and we'll see how far we get. Do we have a microphone? Hello, Houston? Anyone who puts a hand up and gets a microphone can go first, as far as I'm concerned. Go to the lady in the black top. And if you could keep them really short and also your answers concise.
Thank you very much. My name is Natasha Mounier. I work in the investment side. And I'm curious on your views about the taxation of carbon. The current system of carbon permits is really dysfunctional. It costs very little. It's about 7 or 8 euros a ton. And yet, if that were to go up, our energy bill would go up too, because it's clearly passed on to the consumers. So it really creates a conundrum. I'm not sure what's best in terms of carbon reduction and what's best for the consumers and the politicians who we vote for.
Hold that thought. We'll take a question over here. Yes. Do we have a microphone over here?
Yes.
Thank you.
Benny Peiser from the Global Warming Policy Foundation. I don't know whether you've seen the recent debate between President Obama and Romney. But basically they were vying who would get more oil and coal and gas out of the ground. Climate change didn't feature, but they tried to portray themselves as people who would even get more out of the ground. So I think we need a little bit of a reality check. Climate change is dead. Internationally, even in Europe, countries are rolling back the policies. And it's obvious that the countries in the next 20, 30 years that have the cheapest form of energy will be the successful countries, and the countries with the most expensive form of energies will go down the drain. That's the reality, and I wonder whether the penny is beginning to drop in this country.
Yes, but the cheapest form of energy will come from those with the cleverest technology and the greatest efficient use of energy. That's where I come back to the technology point. I mean, I don't quite agree, Benny, that the climate debate is dead. There are a lot of people who are rightly concerned that we could be heading for great climate violence of an increasing kind and leading vast suffering to numbers of people. So that is not the dead. There was the exchange between Mitt Romney and Barack Obama was quite amusing, because Mitt Romney said to Barack, "You're not an oil man." And Barack Obama said, "Well, you're not a gas man." So it's a question of technology. The fear I have is that the overzealotry, the people saying, no, let's push up the prices, let's have carbon permits so poised that carbon becomes cripplingly expensive and a disincentive to all gas and everything, Those who say, never mind about the consumers, never mind about fuel poverty, never mind about industry, let's pile on the costs so that we get a minimum subsidy for renewables. Those people are going to wreck the whole programme, frankly.
Pierre,
They're going to destroy the green programme.
Sorry, David, but could I just, Pierre, could you possibly take on a bit of the first question on pricing?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, you know, the problem we have is that the damage we cause to the global environment is not reflected in the price of the energy we consume, right? That's the most basic definition of the problem we have. If you bring even partly the cost, what we call the external cost of your fossil fuel consumption into the price of energy, you raise, the price is a bit higher or much higher if you do it meaningfully. There's no way around that. Yes, addressing climate change is all about changing the relative prices of energy to make the carbon-intensive ones relatively more expensive and the carbon less intensive one relatively less expensive.
Actually, it's all about what the public will believe and what they will take in the way of messages.
The public can believe whatever they want. The ton of CO2 in a ton of coal will not change.
In a democracy, it actually matters.
Well, indeed, that wasn't that wasn't the point that we heard earlier. It was Mike Stevens who pointed out that it was a real problem what the public believed.
Well, and what he conveyed, and the power of those who have got authority and the eloquence in order to convey the right message. The saving the world message of Al Gore is absolutely hopeless. It is not convincing anybody at all.
You know what? I thought you probably would agree with Al
Absolutely
Gore.
hopeless.
So let's just try a couple
much
of
better
really quick questions towards the end, and then you gentlemen can sum up. There were some hands at the back. Have they? Yes, there's a gentleman here. Yes, please introduce yourself.
I wanted to just come back to...
Could you just introduce yourself?
Sorry, Alan Riley, City University. I was going to ask Pierre about the issue about China. I mean, I talked to some of the Chinese, and when they talk about the scale of the resource base in China for shale gas, they say, yes, there are difficulties, but the potential in terms of their own energy security, the potential in terms of reducing not just the CO2 issues, but the general terrible levels of pollution from coal in Chinese city, the incentives are so great that the idea of having their plan, which is I think 6.5 billion cubic meters by 2015, 100 billion cubic meters by 2020, and then looking at something to 600 to 800 billion cubic meters by 2030. They see that as potentially achievable. Now, if they do that, surely you are talking about something which is a real blunting of climate change, because at the end of the day, they're the sharp end of the CO2 emissions.
Okay, and we have heard from you before, so let's have here someone we haven't heard from before. The gentleman in the middle with the glasses, could you possibly get the mic in here, please, in the middle?
Thanks. My name's Archie Fraser. I'm an alternative energy analyst in the city. The speakers have made a couple of points about the fall in the cost of solar energy and the potential future fall, but I wonder if they're really aware of the scale of what has happened in solar energy. I'd just like to chuck 3 facts at them. Firstly, the cost of a solar module has fallen 80% in the last 4 years, from about €3 a watt to about 60 cents. That's just a question of fact. Secondly, the amount that you can be paid in Germany for a rooftop system under the feed-in tariff is now well below what you actually pay for retail electricity. So if you choose to buy electricity, you will pay about 10% more than the government will pay you for your rooftop system, which shows pretty clearly that the system is competitive at below the level of retail cost. And thirdly, I'd just like to point out that several gigawatts of ground-mounted solar systems are currently in development in Spain. Developers are putting in tens, hundreds of millions of cost in developing several gigawatts of projects which are not expected or intended to receive any subsidy at all.
Right, so we've got one China question. Hang on. Your solar three-pointer. No more three-pointers, but if anyone's got one really, go on. There's a lady up here who's got her hand nice and high, and it looks like she's got a very brief and pointed question.
My name's Nicola Park. I work in industrial gas rather than the natural gas and energy field, but I'm also a STEM ambassador, and we talk a lot about technology is going to be the source. I've been to a school today, and lots of these kids are not interested in STEM subjects, but we need them to come forward in order to bring these technologies so that we can solve this problem. What do you think we should be doing about that?
Right, would you like to take those, David?
So I didn't quite get the last one.
Well, so it was really about your question was how to get interest across in the new technologies. Yeah. But actually it was an interesting question because it's come through tonight, a bit of frustration that we don't win over public support and public opinion. There's no...
I think there's an enormous
Where
amount,
are we going
just
with
starting
this?
at the end, there's an enormous amount to be done in schools about the excitement and possibilities of the new technologies, but they've got to get the cost down. What is naughty in the political world is pretending, as I think someone said earlier in the debate, that we can get to this renewable, green, low-carbon world with less problems of Middle East oil, less problems of digging up the earth and so on, and can do it in a way that is all very easy and won't cost a lot of suffering and difficulty. It can be done, but it's got to be done very slowly and carefully, and it is the misleading idea that we can jump to the low-carbon economy without pain.
We have said that. I think you should move on and talk, just briefly give a reply on solar, if you could.
I can give you a very... what you're saying is largely correct, and indeed I alluded to it earlier, except I think it's fallen by 9 times, not 8 times in the last 5 years. The solar prospects are great. The Chinese have got way ahead in the technology. It is a very big hope for all the villages in desert and poorer areas around the world. 1.25 billion people haven't got electricity at all. Can they get onto huge grids? Very difficult. A much cheaper and possibly a more exciting way is really efficient, low-cost PVCs for low-cost solar development. It's full of potential, it's very exciting, but it all comes down to cost, and the Chinese are leading the way on that, and well done them.
Let's have Pierre then.
No, well, the cost of solar is going down. I mean, fantastic. It's great. I mean, again, if the cost of clean heat and electricity doesn't fall down dramatically, we're not going to solve this problem, right? Because we're never going to impose on ourselves the types of carbon prices we would need to address it meaningfully, right? So the cost of solar has gone down, fantastic. The bill has been extremely high for those who have actually pump-primed this market. Just last year, the total amount of green energy, of renewable energy subsidies in Germany was 17 billion euro a year. It's going to be nearly 20% more than that this year, and it's for 25 years, right? 17 billion euros a year. Just to give you a point of comparison, Abu Dhabi bought 6 gigawatts of nuclear power from the South Koreans for 5.6 billion euros, and that's dispatchable zero-carbon power. So the Germans have paid for bringing down the cost of solar, not by actually improving the technology at all, just bringing the Chinese in.
That's right.
And now they're asking the rest of us, France, the UK, to support them in an antitrust case against China. I mean, you know.
That's right.
You mentioned Spain. Okay, so now that the cost has gone down, perhaps they need less subsidies, or maybe no subsidies at all, which is great. And I agree with you.
So,
but the past 10 years, the government in Spain has refused for the cost of renewables to be reflected in the tariff. So what they did is they created this huge debt, which, guess what? They securitized.
Yeah.
So they created a new junk bond, which is implicitly granted by the Germans because it's in the Eurozone, that you can buy if you want to. You're in the city, you can buy it.
Well, what could possibly go wrong? You see, we give you top tips.
I think it's a nice...
These are all the problems, you're correct. These are all the problems if you go the wrong way, which we've been going in many areas of attempting to subsidize renewables. The future, if we want to get CO2 down, it's got to be step by step, it's got to be politically practical, it's got to be based
No, but I
for the
mean,
minute on
just
gas,
one point,
gas now
I mean,
and technology
you've
later.
spoken
That's
gas
all we
and
need.
technology
That's all we
later.
need. Gas and
Last
technology.
thought from you, Pierre.
Yeah. So
Not everything else is a byword.
Finish.
You've said time and again, it's all about technology. The cost has to go down. It's not going down magically. It's going down if you throw money at it, lots of money at it. Who pays for that? The cost of technology is not going to go down like that. So we cannot go around the problem. This is a serious policy problem because it's very expensive.
Chinese technology is bringing down the price, and there are many other areas where we can get the price down. I agree, it needs government support, that's absolutely right, but it's much better spending money that way than subsidising useless wind farms and offshore farms, which are wildly
But this
expensive.
is
We got that.
Benefit
10
nobody.
seconds to finish your point.
But
Come on,
it
because we all
is-
need to go and have some dinner.
It is very heavy German subsidies for solar that brought the Chinese in and the prices down. It's not magic.
It's technology.
It's not magic at all,
It's
but,
technology.
but I do hope that we have generated at least a bit of light as well as rather a lot of heat, particularly at the end of our debate tonight. Look, thanks to all our speakers and, of course, to Intelligence Squared and Shell for hosting this event, which I've certainly enjoyed very much and hope you have. We would be very grateful if you could fill in the feedback forms, which are on your chairs or probably under your chairs by now if you got agitated and kicked them out of the way. And thank you all so much for coming. Safe journey home.